Welcome back everyone to the second installment of the short series, because let's be honest, it's kind of an underrated art form people don't really talk about enough. Last time we covered a student project that hailed so many awards it gained its creators real jobs in the industry. And today we're peering onto a project from within that industry. Wreck-It Ralph is not a short film, but it is where our next prompt hails alongside of. I think it's more commonly known that Pixar are the type of studios to put their own short films before their full-length theatrical releases, but Disney does it too, bringing us around to this absolute classic of a love story. This is Disney's Paperman, directed by John Cars and suggested by PC Smush and Taylor Allen in the comments of our last video. Tell me more suggestions here or on our Discord. And Paperman's already hopefully standing out for actually being artistic rather than mass-produced like recent Disney projects kind of feel. I mean, look at this art style! A black and white vintage look with a blending of 2D and 3D aesthetics, as if we could get a full film with this kind of look. So the short starts out with our boy named George at a train station. He stands not dejected, but notably bored with life. He's in a suit with paperwork, clearly being that dull office worker archetype. The sounds around him show the world is alive, but intrusive. Constant wind, rattling construction work. The grind of everyday life has taken its toll, and George is left alone in the center of it. Actually a little bit to the left. Room for a potential love interest to take up that spot in the future, perhaps. And then a train comes flying past. What a shocker at a train station. Pushing our guy a little to the right, but he's mostly ineffective. That is until a single piece of paper clings to his shoulder, catching his gaze before continuing its journey with our love interest chasing it also. She only gets the briefest of appearances, but we and George here are hooked. The mediocrities of normal life have a spark to gain our attention. Thankfully, George isn't an overzealous pub lad and doesn't overstep his boundary, planting himself in place but still clearly intrigued with that eyeline lingering across the frame. And just as gently, Meg now returns to the frame, paper in hand, as George rescinds his eye contact. And Meg instead retaliates a little. They're both into each other, but equally trying to be respectful and innocent in their ways. Endearing for us, the audience, who are now going to be rooting for the both of them. Another train blares past, now forcing them to interact as Meg is powed in the face by George's paperwork. I like how it looks like she was briefly going to initiate with that head turn, but nope. And we cut for the first time to these over-the-shoulder shots, getting closer to the characters as the characters themselves get a little closer. And for the first time, color hits the frame, with that lipstick mark lingering on the page. A point of humor for the both of them, and a hint of there being something more in this dull world. But just as quickly, Meg's gone away. The commute rides on, becoming little more than a silhouette in the window as she becomes another unnamed figure in the mass of strangers in any commute. As George is left abandoned on the platform, camera mimicking the train's departure and his sole paper representing his desire to chase after her after that connection. And she too is interested, with a melancholic turn back for a final glance. Only a sad smirk remains for the two of them as the giant city hides them away for life. Also notice how, during their brief laughter, no actual dialogue was exchanged. Not only is it always more artsy that way, but it also allows for any story to be understood regardless of language barrier. In fact, this whole scenario is based off of very common real-life commute scenarios. Director John Cars quoted his inspirations for this as the following. "Every morning on my way to work, I would go through Grand Central Station, and sometimes you'd meet eye to eye with people, just strangers, like a pretty girl or something. And you'd think, is there a connection? You feel that connection for a split second and wonder who that person was. That's the core idea of it. What if two people were really perfect for each other and they had that chance meeting? And what if they were separated? How would those two people get back together again? And how could a little bit of magic and fate intervene to bring them back together?" Pretty cool for a prompt if you ask me, and a surprisingly relatable one across borders. Anyway, the short then continues as we see George at work, staring down glumly at the single piece of intrigue in his sad little life, before it's overwhelmed with a stack of lifeless papers. The boss standing above George as the embodiment of his oppressive status quo, as George is trapped in this life, and trapped in this composition, only getting a quarter of the space with his boss taking up half the screen and the work taking up another quarter. And then with a swift match cut from the boss obscuring the frame, we're back to the frontal mid-shot. An extract of George's work life captured in a bottle. But now the magical wind wants to influence, forcing us to turn to the right as it careens outside before George catches it, bringing our attention to Meg being just across the chasm. That paper probably would have reached her if George didn't nab it. She's prevalent but out of reach, both literally and figuratively, with these shots holding her inside of a small frame within a frame. And when we get this profile shot, the lighting continues to boost Meg up as this elegant beauty with the lighting. The light source is coming from behind her, lighting her up especially round the edges to give off an almost angelic vibe. Very cute. Also, this shows how small and insignificant George's shouts are. Fun fact, the idea for this short first materialized when Cars was working as an animator at Blue Sky Studios in the 90s, as his past works include animating there before going to Pixar, from Bug's Life up to Ratatouille. Hopefully he wasn't feeling as depressed as this. Reportedly, he pitched this idea for a short several times, but Disney was preoccupied with Tangled at the time, and it went ahead and got greenlit only when Disney was searching for a project that would fill the gap between Tangled and Wreck-It Ralph. Well, I'm glad it's finally happened. But with the boss watching and his plights unheard, it's time for our next segment. The camera now tracking George more loosely with his office as he's unshackled, or unhinged from his co-worker's perspective. And after a brief glance at the marked paper, George gets to work on the collection of disposable papers. It's a paper airplane montage. Quick cuts for each fold, a moment of character as George's eyes scan for his boss's looming face, and a nice focus pull recreated in digital form where this shot starts off in focus on one subject before pulling onto something else, building up to us the tools, subtlety, and goal for this next action. But it goes nowhere as George is forced to witness its sad descent. Again! This time making the camera actually pan as more progress is made on this same shot. Just not quite there. And no other attempts get much closer than this. Though I think the reaction to the bird one is probably my favorite. And before he realizes, all the paper is gone. All except the marked one. He preps himself with a sigh, only for the wind itself to take charge, much to his dismay. Though this is also one of the best examples of seeing the shorts as smear frames in action, really taking more steps from the traditional approach of animation. And as George reaches out pathetically, the camera sneaks in a hidden cut in the swerve of motion up to Meg's room. She too is leaving. Perhaps the paper knows best. I wonder what it would say if it could speak. Subscribe! And so George is left with a decision, a scary one, as any appearance from the boss makes all the boys contract into place. He's a strict authority to overpower, but with one more glance at Meg on her way out among the expansive city, this is George's only chance to reunite. Because actually, she's not working here, it's more like she's a one-time client, so the stakes are higher. But George is stopped. The boss has returned, again with a composition capturing half the frame and looking down on George too to take up more of that power. Whereas before he had that power through pure scale, being massive on the frame. And even when we get the reverse shot to this through just expression alone, the boss still maintains that authority in this frame. Now with the lighting tactically shining on the paper and his mouth as the guide to what's expected next of George. And also that the boss is just grumpy. And just like that, another wad of paper is dropped down in front of George, and he must be trapped by them again. However, this time the camera cuts closer and closer to him, and he sits defiantly. And while the rest of the office continues to focus on the words of the boss, George rushes out of there. Though we don't really see him. You briefly see his dark, skinny legs, but it's mostly the swirl of loose papers that paint his path. A pretty cool way of doing this. And as all turn in shock, the camera pans 90 degrees and George is long out of there. Only the loose papers remain. And so now, as the gap closes between the two of them, we get an insinuation of it as we establish Meg wandering the streets, given a low-angle, angelic angle again, with that backlighting again, before the camera, in the same shot now, tilts to the front entrance of George's building. It still takes a cut to see George, but the implication there is how close their relative locations actually are now. George comes blazing out the rotating doors, a couple of paper planes on the floor as a small detail there, as the camera for once takes on a more handheld style. A little rocky for George's sporadic movements and mindsets as he runs out into traffic. also given a low angle, not for power, but for drama, as we don't see anything coming down the street, much like him. It also allows us to see the towering skyscrapers of this gigantic city, easy to get lost in or lose someone else. The lighting here also now shining on George directly from behind for more of that dramatic look, and it's probably one of the first times, as he's usually the one cast in the shadow. And once on the other side of the street, the shadows return as he turns around, absolutely lost on the whereabouts of Meg. A moment of enlightenment, directly in the light, snubbed away quick. And at the end of it, a single paper airplane rests atop a postbox, the very marked one that just drooped away, actively taunting him with the little flutters, the embodiment of George's failures, an attempt that didn't even reach its recipient, not even read. So like any Sims 4 character, he stomps off with an angry gait after the biggest swing he can muster. Time for the magic to come in. As for once, George flew well. High atop of the New York cityscape of black and white, the paper continues to glide, making its way to one isolated alleyway, somehow a dumping ground for all the other airplane attempts. This is a Disney project, remember? So with sentient water and sentient houses, we got sentient paper too now. Or is this a wind thing? Anyway, the marked paper gains motion of its own, inspiring its fellow brethren to follow in its Pied Piper ways, soon becoming a cascading twister of paper planes. As the love tale has seemingly come to an end for both partners, a little redirection is required. And as George stomps past said alleyway, the papers make their retaliation, dancing along like any of those weird, psychedelic Disney sequences of the past. You know the ones. Reaching deep into this shadowy pit that George has just penetrated, the marked one clings to George's ankles. He stops for a moment before casting it aside. He's gonna need more influence than that as the shadows consume him more. Enough papers to physically push him back to the right as the camera continues its slow left motion. Success! Time for more of this. Next, we get a wide shot of the streets, cars clogged in their boring ways, whilst George is pushed into motion by all the more paperwork. Getting a little ridiculous, but certainly fun, as George struggles amongst the city crowds. People are noticing, and he's certainly making a scene of it. Being forced back across the streets by a slightly more forgiving array of trucks this time around, as we get a brief catch-up to spot a single plane encircling George prior to it speeding off in a singular direction. It's the marked one. Of course it's the marked one. Flying high above the disruptions of the city, free in spirit and motion. Spotted as marked only in the light, which is a pretty cool effect. Another point for the enlightenment angle, I guess. And as it speeds past a newsstand, it of course gusts the wind along with it. It's a wind spirit, of course. All to bring us back to Meg, who stands in the most lit up street we've ever seen, positively glowing in contrast. As the plane elegantly plants itself right in view. And look at these expressions Meg goes through. It's an absolutely captivating style. This short is actually animated using a unique toolkit that was built in-house by Disney engineers called Meander, which is apparently a hybrid vector raster-based drawing and animation system that gives artists an interactive way to craft the film, which is pretty cool. And using this software, which is now an accessible plugin for regular animators, is what allowed Kars and his team to, as he says, bring together as best we could the expressiveness of 2D drawing immersed with the stability and dimensionality of CG. There's then also the technique called final line advection implemented to help with this project, giving the artists and animators significantly more control and influence over the final product, as with this method, everything is done with the same department. In Paperman, we didn't have a cloth department and we didn't have a hair department. Here, folds in the fabric, hair silhouettes and the like come from the committed design decision making that comes with a 2D drawn process. Our animators can change things, actually erase away the CG underlayer if they want, and change the profile of the arm, and they can design all the fabric in that Milt Khan kind of way, if they want to. Milt Khan, by the way, is an OG Disney animator. Essentially, this short got a whole new reworkable animation engine to achieve this unique and beautiful effect. Isn't it great? Just wanted to gush for a moment. And you don't need 50 sheets to get Meg on the move. Perhaps her being less tied down by the menialities of life like George has her required less of a push than him. So far, her life has been following paper, being a client, and looking at flowers. What do you do, Meg? Anyway, she's now hooked and gonna be doing one of her 3 favorite things again. It's chasing a paper. One set does the pushing and the other does a little pulling. And the shots of these two in chaotic motion are split with transition wipes. Not just exclusive to Star Star Wars, but also pretty common for these city settings, as it mimics a pedestrian simply walking across the frame. Both are led to their closest train station, one more elegantly than the other. Man, I know I'm only 2 episodes into this, but how common of a theme is it going to be that the girl is prim and perfect while the boy has a rougher, more chaotic vibe? Can anyone suggest a version of these roles reversed? I'm gonna get jaded real quick if this is all I see. George gets wider shots with more camera motion, whilst Meg has more expressive mid shots and a more static cam to demonstrate their vibes. And another behind-the-scenes thing for you, Meg is voiced by Carl Walgren, who said that recording for her role took about 30 minutes, and she was asked to do the role because of her previous involvement in Bolt and Tangled. She voices Mindy, and also Tigress, Jessica, and Baby Scrat later. Since the film is mostly silent, they wanted some vocal ambience that they could experiment with. We played with a lot of different vocal reactions in the session. Snorts, gasps, breaths. I think one chuckle made it into the final mix. I'm actually glad they kept it mostly silent. I think it makes the short even more powerful that way. And eventually, each reach their train. Meg now placed to the right, swiping to the left, and George on the left shoved towards the right, readying for them to meet in the middle, as the train mechanics set off to be in motion. They skipped the part where the paper gripped each individual finger to force George to skip his debit card to enter the train station. Though I do think the one shot of George angrily unable to release the papers is probably my favorite gag of the piece. And just like that, both trains meet at a mutual train station. Meg's piece, needing no more work, safely concluded within her hands as she steps out onto the platform. And even when she lets it free, it remains inanimate. The destination has been reached. And as we look down on said paper in her hands, the background tells the rest of the story as a wave of paper slides across the floor beneath her. Flip to looking up at Meg with the sun, of course, fully backlighting her again, and she's elated. With a simple turn, we're back where we started. George, maybe a little more disheveled this time around, but he too is free of his papery shackles upon arrival. And with one final 2-shot of the both of them, they finally reunite in the middle. No words, no gags, just two clearly interested people about to take their first steps in a new relationship. Also, yes, according to Cars, George and Meg were intentionally drawn to complement and match each other's designs. And that's the end. We get some bonus previews in the credits sequence of what seems like their first date, and that's the magical love tale of a Disney commute. This film would then go on to win many awards, of course. It won Disney an Annie Award for the Best Animated Short Subject, as well as an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film? Damn! That's the first shorts win for Disney since 1969 with It's Tough to Be a Bird, apparently. Will we ever see a full-length movie like this? Well, it's already been a decade. It's likely too beefy a process to get a full 2 hours, but it has since become a plug-in toolkit, and they did make another short using this system, so that's pretty cool. And then, of course, everyone moved on. The director would go on to make more shorts, animate on Frozen, and co-direct Over the Moon, whilst the composer would go on to do the Free Guy soundtrack. This song even made it into the credits of that project. I haven't mentioned it up to this point, but the whole time the soundtrack has been monumental to this short. It's just, mwah, fantastic. And the Oscars would go on to spit on the legacy of animation even 10 years later. Ah, the world continues on. But you don't need me to tell you that animation is cinema. I'll just pop up every few weekends showing you some art to analyze. Or if you want to see more of me, here's what we're up to all month on Twitch. It's a much smaller community, but come get to know me more. Here's a snippet.
Sora! Not you again! Oh, I can put this in my butt pocket. Bad move! Oh my, Rex, what are you doing up here?
This version of Iron Man has to go up against Thanos. Egon uses butt.
Clean this looks. And what do we get? We get this! Are you kidding me?
Or keep up with us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for different outlets of content. For now, my name's been Dazz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit.